Beneath the endless blue of the desert sky, a lone traveler walked slowly across the hot sand, his feet sinking into the golden dunes with every step. The desert stretched out in every direction, silent and still, except for the faint whisper of the wind brushing against the surface of the sand. He had been walking for hours, guided only by instinct and the sun above, when something caught his eye. At first, he thought it was nothing more than a trick of the light, a strange shadow cast by the uneven ground. But as he moved closer, he noticed a curved shape, dark and metallic, half buried in the sand. His curiosity stirred, and he stopped to take a better look. It didn't resemble any rock he had seen before. With a little hesitation, he bent down and brushed the sand away with his hands. The texture beneath his fingers was smooth, cold in places even under the sun, and unlike any stone or wood. It was metal, though unlike the kind used in machines or tools. It looked too perfect, too polished, as if it had been waiting under the desert for ages without rusting or breaking. The more he uncovered, the more he realized that this was no small object. The shape continued to curve, stretching wider than he could imagine, its surface marked with faint designs that shimmered when the sunlight touched them. His heart began to beat faster. What was this thing doing here, hidden in a place where nothing survived for long? He had heard stories of ruins buried under deserts, of ancient cities swallowed by sand, but this was different. This didn't feel like ruins. This felt like something alive, something that was never meant to be forgotten. The traveler stood up and looked around. The desert was empty, no one else in sight, only the soft waves of sand stretching out to the horizon. For a moment, he thought about leaving, about continuing on his path, and forgetting he ever saw this strange object. But something inside him urged him to stay. There was a pull, almost like the object wanted to be found, like it had been waiting for him to arrive. That he dug more, his hands growing tired as the sand slipped back over the edges of the hole. Still, he pushed forward, uncovering more of the structure. Soon, it became clear that this wasn't just a piece of metal. It was part of something massive, something shaped like a vessel. The sharp lines and curves suggested design, not chance. And then, as he stepped back to catch his breath, he realized what it looked like. A ship. But a ship in the desert made no sense. There was no sea, no river, nothing but dry land stretching for miles. The idea seemed impossible, yet the evidence was right in front of him. Kneeling again, he traced his fingers across the surface. Symbols appeared beneath the layer of dust, carved with precision into the metal. They weren't letters he could recognize, but they looked purposeful, as though they carried a message. The symbols glowed faintly in the fading light, as if they were responding to his touch. He pulled his hand away quickly, his heart racing, but the glow faded slowly, leaving him with an uneasy sense that he had awakened something. He whispered to himself, trying to make sense of what he was seeing, but no explanation came. The desert was silent, as though it too was holding its breath. The sun began to lower in the sky, painting the horizon in shades of orange and gold. The traveler sat beside the half-buried ship, staring at its mysterious surface. Questions filled his mind, each one heavier than the last. Who had built this? How long had it been here? And most of all, why did it feel like it was waiting? He thought about the desert, how once long ago, this land might have been covered by water. Maybe this ship had sailed across those ancient waves, carrying people whose stories were now lost. But if that was true, why did the ship look untouched by time? Why did it feel as if it had just arrived? As night began to fall, a cool breeze moved across the dunes, and the stars slowly appeared above, clear and endless in the desert sky. The traveler lay back on the sand, his eyes still fixed on the strange structure, unable to look away. The silence of the desert seemed deeper now, but instead of loneliness, it carried a quiet sense of anticipation, as though the sand itself knew the secret buried beneath it. He felt both small and important at the same time, as if stumbling across this discovery was no accident. The ship was there for a reason, and somehow he had become part of its story. That he closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the soft hum of the wind. But even then, he thought he could hear something else, something almost too faint to notice, like a low vibration deep within the ship. He opened his eyes again, staring at it in wonder. It hadn't spoken yet, but in his heart, he sensed that it wasn't silent. It was waiting, and the desert had only been its resting place. The night stretched long, but he knew sleep wouldn't come easily. Something about this discovery had changed the way he saw the world. The desert was no longer empty. It was holding a secret, and now he was the only one who had found it. The desert morning began slowly, with the first rays of sunlight touching the tops of the dunes and turning them into waves of gold. The traveler, who had spent the night beside the strange ship, opened his eyes to the stillness around him. His body was tired from the digging, but his mind refused to rest. All night he had stared at the dark shape half buried in the sand, wondering what it truly was. Now, in the daylight, it looked even more mysterious. The polished surface reflected the sun faintly, and the strange symbols he had uncovered seemed to shimmer as if the light was sliding across them in patterns. He ran his hand over the surface again, tracing the markings. They felt old yet alive, carved with a skill beyond anything he had ever seen. He thought of how long they might have been here, untouched, waiting under the desert. The desert could hide many things, but this was no ruin or broken piece of history. This was something different, something that carried a presence. As though it still had purpose, that he decided to explore more of the ship, pushing sand away from its side. The metal was smooth, curved, and stretched wider than he had expected. Every part he uncovered revealed more signs that this was no ordinary object. There were panels, seams that looked like doors, and lines that appeared too perfect to be the work of chance. He wondered what lay inside, but the idea of entering filled him with both excitement and unease. The air around the ship felt different, heavier in a way, as if the object was surrounded by time itself. Each sound of the sand shifting seemed louder near it, and even the wind grew quiet, almost cautious. As the sun rose higher, he stepped back to look at the whole shape that was beginning to reveal itself. It was clear now that this was a ship, though not the kind that floated on water. It looked built for something greater, perhaps for the sky or even beyond. Its design was smooth and endless, without the rough edges of human work. He felt small standing next to it, like a child standing before something ancient and powerful. And yet, the feeling in his chest was not fear. It was connection. He could not explain why, but he felt as if the ship knew he was there, as if it had been waiting for him, or someone like him, for a very long time. Walking around it, he noticed other markings in the sand. At first he thought they were natural shapes formed by the wind, but when he looked closely, he saw faint impressions. They were not footprints, not exactly, but they had a rhythm, a pattern, as though something once walked here long ago. The impressions were faint, nearly erased by time, but their direction was clear. They led toward the ship and disappeared beneath the sand where it rested. He knelt down, brushing the surface carefully, and felt a strange shiver run through him. Whoever or whatever made these marks had been connected to the ship. As the heat of the day grew stronger, he sat beside the ship, drinking from his flask, staring at it in silence. His thoughts turned to the past. What kind of world had this belonged to? Was there a time when this land had not been desert, when water or forests covered the earth, and ships like this moved freely? The desert had swallowed many things through history, but this one was different. It had not decayed, it had not broken. It was preserved as though the years could not touch it. That thought alone filled him with wonder. Time seemed to move around the ship, never through it. Later, as the sun began to lower and the shadows stretched longer, he felt the ground beneath him vibrate ever so faintly. It was so soft he thought at first it might be his imagination, but when he placed his hand on the sand, he was certain. The vibration came from the ship. It was not loud, not forceful, but steady, like the faint hum of something alive. He leaned closer, pressing his ear to the surface, and though he heard no clear sound, he felt that same gentle pulse traveling through the metal. The realization shook him. This ship was not dead. It was not a forgotten relic. It was still awake, still waiting. The traveler stood up quickly, his eyes scanning the endless desert around him. He half expected to see others watching, perhaps those who had hidden the ship long ago. But there was no one, only the stillness of the sand and the wide, empty horizon. He returned his gaze to the vessel, his heart racing. The thought grew stronger in his mind now. This was not simply an object of history. This was a message, left for someone to find when the time was right. The symbols, the hum, the untouched state of the metal. It all spoke of something beyond the reach of ordinary time. As night fell again, he made a small fire and sat watching the glow reflect off the curved surface of the ship. The desert stars stretched endlessly above, their light scattered across the dark sky. The air was cool, and the silence pressed in around him. He could not escape the thought that the ship was listening, that it was aware of him sitting there. He wondered if he should leave, but another part of him knew he would not. The ship had waited for too long, and now he had found it. Whatever it meant, whatever secret it carried, it was now part of his path. With these thoughts circling in his mind, he lay back on the sand, the strange hum still faint beneath the ground, as steady as a heartbeat. The desert seemed to guard the ship, holding it safe until the time came for its secret to be revealed. And as the traveler drifted into restless sleep, one thought remained stronger than the rest. This was no ruin, no accident of time. This was a sign of another world, another age, and it had chosen to be seen again. The next morning in the desert was calm, the kind of calm that almost felt too quiet, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The traveler woke with the strange hum of the ship still echoing in his thoughts. It had not been loud, but it had been steady, almost like a whisper through the sand. Now, in the morning light, he looked at the ship again. It was no longer just a buried object in the dunes. He could feel it, as though it carried a presence that was slowly reaching out. The sunlight touched its surface and gave it a glow, soft but alive. He walked closer, placing his hand on the smooth metal once more. The vibration was still there, faint but clear, as if the ship had a pulse of its own. For a long moment, he simply stood in silence, his hand resting on the strange surface, his heart beating faster with each second. Something had changed since the day before. The ship was not just waiting, it was waking up that he stepped back, eyes wide, watching as the patterns on the side of the ship began to shimmer. At first, he thought it was only the reflection of the sun, but then the glow deepened, spreading across the markings like threads of light weaving into each other. It was not random. The light moved with purpose, forming shapes, almost like words written in a language he could not understand. The sight made him feel small, but it also filled him with awe. He could not read the symbols, yet he felt them, as though they were speaking to him in a way beyond words. They carried meaning, not in sound but in feeling. A wave of warmth ran through him, and for the first time, he did not just see the ship as a machine. It felt alive, like an old being opening its eyes after a long sleep that he whispered to himself without thinking. "It's waking." The words slipped from his mouth naturally, almost as if they were meant for the ship to hear. And in that moment, the hum grew stronger. The sand around the base shifted gently, and a low, steady sound filled the air, not harsh, but deep and soothing, like the earth itself was breathing. The traveler stumbled back a step, overwhelmed, but he could not bring himself to run. Fear mixed with wonder, and yet something inside told him this was not a danger. This was a meeting. The ship's surface began to change again. A section that once looked like solid metal slowly shifted, a line appearing where none had been before. The line widened, turning into an outline of a doorway. Sand poured off its edges as though it had been sealed for centuries, now opening for the first time. The traveler held his breath, staring at the dark entrance forming before his eyes. It was as if the ship had recognized him, as if it had chosen to reveal itself to him. His hands trembled, but his feet moved closer, drawn by something he could not resist. The doorway did not open all the way, but enough for him to peer inside. Within the shadows, faint blue light glowed, soft and calm, like starlight trapped in a bottle that he hesitated, standing at the threshold. Every part of him knew this was a turning point. Once he stepped inside, there would be no going back to the simple life he had known before. The desert, the sand, the silence of his old journey. All of it would feel small compared to this moment. He took a deep breath, letting the dry desert air fill his lungs, and slowly leaned inside. The air within was cool, almost too clean, as if it had been untouched by time. It carried no dust, no decay, only a stillness that felt alive. Inside, he saw walls that shimmered faintly, as though light flowed beneath their surface. They were smooth, seamless, and curved like the inside of a great shell. Along the floor were faint lines glowing softly, guiding his steps forward. The hum he had felt outside was louder here, but not in a painful way. It was steady and calming, like the rhythm of a heartbeat close to his ear. Each step he took seemed to wake another part of the ship, lights blooming gently along the walls, as if to welcome him. He walked slowly, his heart racing but his mind filled with wonder that he reached what looked like the center of the ship. A circular chamber opened before him, its ceiling high and glowing with faint light that felt like a night sky full of stars. In the middle of the chamber stood a single structure, raised slightly above the floor. It was a chair, but not like any chair he had ever seen. It was tall, shaped with elegance, and surrounded by panels of soft light. As he stepped closer, the hum shifted once more, and for the first time, he heard words. Not with his ears, but in his mind. "Awaiting your orders, Admiral." The traveler froze. The voice was clear, calm, and gentle, but it carried a weight of authority. His heart pounded as he looked around, but there was no one else in the chamber. The words were for him. He could not understand why the ship had called him that title, but the sound of it filled him with shivers. Admiral. As though he was someone who had belonged here long ago, or perhaps someone chosen now to take command, that he stood in silence, not knowing how to respond. The ship did not speak again, but the lights pulsed softly, waiting, patient, as though it had all the time in the world. He took a step closer to the chair, running his fingers along the glowing panels beside it. The surface responded instantly, patterns of light flowing beneath his touch like ripples on water. It was then he realized, the ship was not just alive, it was listening. It was ready. As he pulled his hand back, the chamber dimmed slightly, as though reminding him that this was only the beginning. His mind swirled with questions. Why had it called him Admiral? How long had it been waiting in silence? And what would happen now that it was awake? He did not know the answers, but he could feel in his heart that his life had changed forever. The desert outside was silent, but within the buried ship, something long asleep had stirred once more. The traveler stood in the glowing chamber, caught between fear and wonder, knowing the world would never be the same again. The chamber inside the ship was silent except for the steady hum that seemed to echo softly through the air, and as the traveler stood there, staring at the glowing walls, he felt as though the silence itself carried voices from another time. The lights on the panels around him pulsed gently, not in a random rhythm but in patterns, almost like breathing, almost like a memory trying to be remembered. He slowly placed his hand back on one of the glowing surfaces, and as he did, the chamber brightened. Images appeared all around him, not solid like objects, but shimmering like reflections in water. At first they made no sense, flashes of stars, distant worlds, great oceans and mountains, but slowly they began to settle into clearer shapes. He saw figures, tall and strong, dressed in clothing that looked both ancient and futuristic, as if made from light itself. They moved with a sense of purpose, working together inside the same ship he now stood in. Their faces were calm, their voices unheard, yet he could almost feel the weight of their presence. These were the ones who had come before him, the ones who had once commanded this vessel, and suddenly he realized, he was looking at the past. The visions flowed gently, one into the other, showing great journeys through the stars, the ship soaring silently across the darkness of space. He saw vast cities glittering on worlds he had never imagined, oceans with skies filled by two suns, mountains taller than clouds. He saw people welcoming the ship as it landed, offering food, offering songs, offering peace. Then, just as easily, he saw battles, flashes of fire in the blackness of space, ships colliding, light tearing across the sky. His heart tightened at the sight, though the images did not stay long. The ship did not seem to want to show too much of the violence. Instead, it turned to quieter memories of journeys taken, promises made, and bonds formed between distant worlds. The traveler stood still, letting the visions surround him, his chest heavy with wonder and a strange sadness, as though he were walking through the memories of someone else's life. The voice returned, not loud, but deep and steady, like the calm reminder of an old teacher. Admiral, the records are yours. He swallowed, unsure how to respond, but the ship seemed to sense his hesitation. The visions shifted again, this time showing something that struck closer to his heart. He saw the desert, the same dunes he had crossed, but they were not empty as he knew them now. Instead, they were green, alive with rivers and fields. A great city stood where there was now only sand, its towers glimmering with light, its streets filled with people. Laughter and life filled the air. His breath caught as he realized that this land, the one he thought had always been dry and lonely, had once been a place of life and beauty. The desert was not always a desert. Time had swallowed it, just as it had buried the ship. He reached out, almost wanting to touch the images, but they dissolved like smoke before his hand. A weight pressed on him then, not of fear, but of responsibility. The ship had not been forgotten by accident. It had been buried here, left to sleep, waiting. And now, after 1,000 years, it had chosen to wake in his presence. Why him? Why now? The questions filled his mind, but the silence of the ship gave no answers. Instead, it continued to show him echoes of what had once been. He saw the crew again, their hands moving over glowing panels, just as he had. He saw them speaking, though he could not hear their voices. He felt their unity, their strength, and most of all, their trust in something greater than themselves. The traveler's heart softened as he realized these were not just memories for him to watch. They were gifts, pieces of history handed down, so that he might carry them forward. He felt a strange closeness to those he saw, though they had lived long before him. It was as though the walls of time had thinned, letting their hopes and dreams reach into his own life. The hum of the ship deepened, and he thought for a moment that he could hear faint whispers within it, echoes not of machines but of people. He stood there quietly, letting it all settle inside him, until he felt as though the ship was no longer just a vessel, but almost like a guardian, a keeper of stories that refused to die. When the lights dimmed again, he found himself standing alone in the chamber, but the weight of what he had seen remained. His hands trembled, but not with fear, with the heaviness of understanding. The ship had lived, had carried lives, had seen wonders beyond imagination, and now those memories were shared with him. The silence felt different now, not empty but full, like the pause between notes in a beautiful song. He looked around, the walls glowing softly, and whispered, "I hear you." For the first time, he did not feel like a stranger inside the ship. He felt like someone meant to be there. The doorway behind him remained open, the desert waiting just beyond, but he did not turn back. Instead, he sat down on the floor of the chamber, his body tired yet his mind restless, filled with questions and feelings he could not explain. The air inside was cool, comforting, as though the ship itself wanted him to rest. He leaned back, closing his eyes, and the faint hum lulled him like a lullaby. Even as sleep pulled at him, the images of cities, of oceans, of skies filled with stars remained in his thoughts. He knew this was only the beginning, and that the ship still had more to show. Outside, the desert wind whispered across the dunes, carrying grains of sand that had waited 1,000 years. Inside, the traveler rested within the heart of a ship that remembered everything, waiting for him to rise again and take the next step. And as his breathing slowed and his mind drifted, the glow of the chamber softened, holding him gently, as though protecting a dream that had just begun. The traveler woke inside the chamber of the ship with a heavy stillness in his heart, as if the dreams of another time had settled deep into him and refused to fade. The glow of the walls was softer now, like the ship was waiting, patient but expectant. He stood slowly, brushing sand from his clothes, and looked around the silent room, knowing he could no longer pretend this was just an old ruin. It was alive in its own way, holding memories, holding power, holding a purpose that had survived long after the people who built it were gone. He felt the weight of that realization pressing against his chest. For days he had wandered the desert searching for meaning, thinking the land gave nothing but emptiness. And now he stood inside a vessel that had crossed stars, a ship that spoke to him as if he were someone meant to carry its future. The air seemed to thrum quietly, waiting for his decision. The voice returned, steady and calm, though no mouth spoke the words. "Awaiting your orders, Admiral." Those words struck deeper this time, because now he understood what they meant. The ship was not only repeating an old command, it was offering him a choice. The past had been shown, the echoes of long-gone lives had been given, and now the present was in his hands. He looked at the panels glowing faintly in front of him and wondered, what could he possibly command? He was no leader of armies, no traveler of stars, just one person lost in the desert who had stumbled across something that should not have survived 1,000 years. Yet the ship had chosen him. And in that thought, there was both fear and comfort that he stepped closer to the main console, running his hand along its cool surface. The lights brightened beneath his touch, almost like they recognized him, almost like they were encouraging him to speak. His lips parted, but no words came out at first. He closed his eyes, breathing deeply, and thought of all he had seen. The green valleys that had turned into desert, the lives that once filled the land, the unity of those who had guided this ship across endless darkness. He thought of the silence of the present world outside, where people struggled, where the desert swallowed dreams, where so much had been forgotten. Maybe, he thought, this was why the ship had waited. Not for a warrior or a conqueror, but for someone willing to listen, someone willing to remember. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but steady. "Show me how to help." The hum of the ship deepened in response, not like an answer but like a heartbeat joining with his. The lights shifted, forming new patterns, and once again images rose in the air, but these were different. They did not show the past or the journeys of those who came before. They showed possibilities, visions of the present world outside, the desert as it was now, but also small glimpses of what could be. He saw water flowing again where rivers had long dried, plants growing where sand had rained, people gathering and building, their faces lit with hope. It was not a promise, but an invitation. The ship was not offering power for him to rule, but tools to restore, to heal. The choice was his, and the responsibility as well. He sank to his knees, overwhelmed, tears stinging his eyes though he could not explain why. Perhaps it was the kindness and the vision, the thought that the future was not fixed but could be shaped. He had lived believing the world gave nothing back, but here was proof that change was possible, that forgotten dreams could rise again. He whispered his thanks, and though the ship gave no words in reply, he felt its presence wrap around him like a silent embrace. After a long time, he rose again. His body was tired, but his spirit felt lighter, filled with something he had not felt in years: purpose. He looked once more at the glowing walls, the silent promise waiting inside them, and he nodded. He did not need to be called admiral, nor did he need to claim ownership of the ship. What mattered was carrying forward the choice it had given him. The choice to use the past not as a chain, but as a guide for the present. He turned toward the open doorway, where the golden desert waited, the same desert that had hidden this vessel for so long. Stepping out, the sunlight warmed his skin, and for the first time, the endless sands did not look empty. They looked like the beginning of something. Behind him, the ship remained, half buried in silence, its lights dimming once more but not gone. It did not need to follow him, because a part of it already lived inside him now. As the traveler walked back across the dunes, the wind carrying his footprints away, he carried something no storm could erase. The memory of what had been, and the choice to shape what could still come. The ship had waited 1,000 years, and in the present moment, its purpose had finally been found, not through power, but through the simple courage of one human heart ready to choose hope.